Welcome, dear listeners. Tonight, let your thoughts drift gently as we take you on a peaceful journey. This is a space for calm, for quiet moments, and for the kind of stories that settle your heart and slow your breath. Make yourself comfortable, close your eyes if you wish, and allow the world to soften around you. Now, let's begin with tonight's story. Today's story is titled The Flameborne Chronicles, the Phoenix Flame. Act 1, The Lantern's Invitation. The wind that night was not like any other. It swept over the moss-covered hills of Elder Grove, whispering secrets only the trees could understand. The woods, dense and ancient, shimmered in the pale light of the twin moons above. Somewhere within that darkness, a single flicker of fire danced against the wind, a wandering ember carried in the hollowed husk of a dried turnip. The one carrying it was an old man, hunched, cloaked in layers of patchy wool and silence. His name was not remembered, not by villagers, not by scholars. But the children who told stories around hearths and beneath blankets called him the Lantern Walker. They said he only appeared when the veil between the living and the dead thinned, when shadows stretched a little longer, and the night air sang in strange harmonies. No one knew where he came from. But tonight, you follow him. You do not remember how you got here, or why your feet chose this forgotten trail. The path beneath you is soft with rotting leaves, and the scent of damp earth clings to your skin. Yet, there is no fear. Only quiet anticipation, as if something or someone has been waiting for you. Ahead, the lantern sways in rhythm with the old man's steps, casting warped silhouettes on the gnarled trunks around him. As you draw closer, he finally stops. The lantern is placed on a stone slab covered in moss, and without turning, he speaks. His voice is sandpaper on silk, ancient, tired, and yet somehow timeless. You've come to hear the truth. You nod, not knowing why. The world remembers tales, he continues, but memory is a trickster. It reshapes, forgets, exaggerates. What I will tell you is not what you've heard in bedtime whispers. This is older. And it begins not with a man, but with a promise. He lifts the lantern. The fire inside flares, illuminating the forest around you, and suddenly, you are no longer standing in Elder Grove. Instead, you are in a different time. A different place. A village with no name stretches before you, cradled between fog-covered hills and a blackened river. The year is unknown, though it smells like harvest and impending frost. This is where the story begins. In this village, there lived a man called Corwin Ashvale. He was a clever blacksmith, sharper with his tongue than his hammer, and known for tricking those he deemed foolish enough to deserve it. But his charm made him dangerous. Women adored him, men respected him, and children followed him like ducks to water. But Corwin was restless. Beneath the surface of his mischief lived a thirst not for drink or gold, but for escape. He feared death. Not in the way cowards do, but in the way thinkers do. He feared the nothingness, the end of laughter, the end of self. So one autumn night, beneath a blood-red moon, Corwin lit a fire and called out to whatever would answer. What came, was not of this world. The shadow that stepped from the woods bore no face, only teeth that glinted like shattered mirrors and eyes that shifted like oil in a puddle. I seek a bargain, Corwin said, steady as iron. I do not grant wishes, replied the shadow. I don't want wishes. I want time. The entity tilted its head, intrigued. I'll give you time, it hissed, but time has two ends. Yours, and mine. And so the deal was struck. Corwin would be granted 50 more years, no sickness, no decay, no death. But when those years ended, his soul would not pass on. It would belong to the entity, to wander and burn in the spaces between life and the beyond. The blacksmith agreed, arrogantly believing he could outwit even fate itself. And for 50 years, he did. He lived. He laughed. He loved. He became legend. But time is no friend to the prideful. On the final night of the final year, the shadow returned, carrying a lantern made of bone and smoke. It's time. But Corwin had prepared. He carved wards around his home, laid salt beneath every stone, even captured the flame from lightning and sealed it in a brass box. And still it came. What followed was not a battle, but a trick. Corwin trapped the shadow within a ring of silver and demanded a new bargain. If it would leave him be, he would extinguish the flame that bound it. The shadow, for the first time, laughed. You are clever, it admitted, but you are already mine. And then, with a single breath, it shattered the circle. Corwin's soul was torn from his chest, and the villagers awoke to find his forge cold and empty, his house filled with ash, and a single lantern burning on the doorstep. From that night forward, they whispered of a figure who walked the woods carrying a cursed flame, neither living nor dead. Corwin had become something more. Something eternal. And thus, the legend of Jack-o'-lantern was born. The fire flickers again and you are back in Elder Grove. The lantern walker is gone. In his place, the mossy stone now holds the lantern he once carried. Its flame is small, but it waits. For you. Act 2, The Harvest of Shadows. In the years that followed Corwin Ashvale's vanishing, the village where he once lived withered like a fruit left too long on the vine. The forge fell silent. The anvil, once rung with purpose and pride, rusted beneath a veil of creeping moss. No children laughed along the riverbanks. No lanterns flickered along the cobbled lanes come dusk. Elder Grove, as it came to be known in old tales, had become cursed ground. Or so people claimed. But curses, like seeds, do not die. They wait. And 30 years after the fall of Ashvale, someone returned. She came not on foot, but on a cart pulled by a two-headed mule. Cloaked in black but crowned with wildflowers, she was known only as Myra Thornhollow, and she said she had business with the dead. No one remembered her family. No record of her birth existed. Yet when she spoke, the wind listened. The crows tilted their heads, and the soil beneath her heels stirred as though awakening. Myra moved into the old ash-veiled house. The villagers, those who remained, whispered behind shuttered windows. Some said she was Corwin's daughter. Others claimed she was his widow returned from some forgotten land. Still others believed she was not of this world at all. Whatever the truth, Myra brought change. On the first night of the harvest moon, she lit a fire in Corwin's broken forge. On the second night, she carved strange symbols into the barn doors and painted them with fox blood and soot. And on the third night, the eve of Ashfall, she lit a lantern. Not just any lantern. A pumpkin, carved with a grin so wide it seemed to stretch into madness, and lit from within by a flame that flickered green and gold. The villagers who dared peek through the trees claimed the light did not cast shadows. It swallowed them. Then came the dreams. One by one, the villagers began to wake screaming. Dreams of fire and hollow eyes. Of Corwin, bound in chains forged from starlight, screaming for release. Of a doorway beneath the roots of the world, and something knocking from the other side. By the seventh day, the bravest among them, a widow named Anselma, a mute boy called Rin, and a former priest turned brewer named Father Elric, confronted Myra at dawn. They found her in the field behind the forge, surrounded by hundreds of carved pumpkins, each glowing with an inner fire, each grinning. "You've brought the darkness back," Anselma accused. "I've brought the truth," Myra said, unblinking. "The truth is dead." "No," Myra whispered. "The truth is buried." And with a single motion, she tapped her staff, a twisted branch bound with crow feathers, to the earth. The soil trembled. From beneath the field, a root system unlike any ever seen emerged, thick, dark vines pulsing with green light, coiling around the pumpkins, lifting them into the air like a harvest born of nightmares. The mute boy Ren let out a sound, not speech, but a gasp of awe and terror. Myra turned to them, her eyes glowing. "I am the lantern's heir." Corwin was only the beginning. And with that, the pumpkins exploded into smoke and flame, and from the ashes stepped the shades of the harvested. These were not ghosts in white sheets or wisps of memory. These were people. Real. Tangible. But their eyes were hollow, their smiles fixed, and each carried a carved lantern at their waist. Myra raised her hand, and the shades obeyed. "They are not here to harm," she said gently. "They are here to remember." Each shade moved toward a home, a hearth, a family they once had. Some embraced crying elders. Some walked silently past shuttered doors. One simply sat beneath an apple tree and wept. Father Elric fell to his knees. "This is blasphemy," he muttered. "This is balance," Myra corrected. "The lantern is not just for the dead. It is for the forgotten. And now it burns for them all." As the moon reached its peak, the shades returned to the field and stood in a great circle around Myra. Their lanterns pulsed like heartbeats. And then, she spoke the ancient words. From root to flame, from ash to name, return to earth until next we claim. One by one, the shades knelt, placing their lanterns upon the soil. The vines reached up to accept them, swallowing light and memory back into the ground. Silence. Myra turned back to the three villagers. Next year, more will come. More will remember. This is not a haunting. This is a harvest. And with that, she vanished into the forge. Only the grinning pumpkins remained, watching. Waiting. From that night on, Elder Grove changed. Some villagers left, unable to sleep near the fields of memory. Others stayed, lighting pumpkins outside their doors not to ward off evil but to guide the harvested home. The legend of Jack-o'-lantern was no longer a tale of a trickster bound in darkness. It was a legacy. And Myra Thornhollow had only just begun. Act 3, The Hollow Path. Long after the lanterns had faded and the shades returned to the soil, Myra Thornhollow sat alone in the heart of the Ashvale Forge. The walls still bore the marks of Corwin's hands. His hammer lay rusted on the shelf, and the floor carried the faint smell of burnt iron and oiled leather. But it was beneath the forge, far below the surface, that Myra knew her true path waited. She pressed her palm to the hearthstone. A low vibration answered. The stone shifted. A hidden stairway spiraled down into darkness, lit only by the flame of Myra's own lantern, the very one she'd carved on the night of Ashfall. The green-gold fire within it seemed to pulse in time with her heartbeat. She descended, one step at a time, each footfall echoing like the toll of a distant bell. This was not just a basement. It was a tunnel. A hollow path carved through the bedrock, its walls etched with symbols older than kingdoms, older than language. Shapes of twisted trees, of open mouths, of a flame held aloft by 1,000 hands. This was where Corwin had come after his pact. This was where he had hidden what remained of the old bargain. The hollow path. Myra walked for what felt like hours. Time unraveled here. Days collapsed into moments. At some point, she realized she was no longer alone. Footsteps echoed behind her, too soft for shoes, too rhythmic for beasts. When she turned, there was nothing. Only the distant shimmer of more lanterns flickering in the far-off dark. But she pressed on. At last, the tunnel opened into a chamber vast and circular, its ceiling lost in blackness. In the center, upon a pedestal of gnarled stone, sat a book. Bound in bark. Chained in root. Breathing. Myra approached, kneeling before it. The lantern in her hand flared not in warning, but in recognition. She had found the Codex Igniferum, the flame book. And it was awake. As she reached out, the roots coiled back, allowing her to place her hands upon its cover. It felt warm. Alive. and when she opened it, the pages fluttered as if moved by a breath that was not her own. The writing was not in ink. It was fire. Words formed and burned, reshaping themselves as she read. The flame remembers. The hollow welcomes. He who betrayed time sleeps. But not forever. She knew instantly. Corwin Ashvale was not dead. Not entirely. His soul, though claimed by the lantern, had resisted its fate. In his arrogance, he had carved a second bargain, a secret clause buried in shadow. He had hidden part of himself in the hollow path, where even the reapers dared not walk. Myra slammed the book shut. If Corwin stirred, the balance would fracture. Lanterns were meant to guide souls, not trap them. The shades she had summoned in the field, they were only echoes. But if Corwin's soul broke free, the hollow itself might tear open. She had to warn the village. But as she turned, the way back was gone. In its place stood a door. It had not been there before. Carved from charred wood, it was wrapped in iron bands and etched with a symbol she did not recognize, a tree whose roots formed a screaming face. A whisper curled from beneath the frame. You lit the fire. Now bear its hunger. Myra hesitated. Lantern in hand, heart pounding, she reached for the handle. Cold. So cold it bit into her skin. But she turned it, and the door swung open. Not into the tunnel. Not into Elder Grove. But into a world of flame and memory where lanterns floated through endless sky, each one a soul suspended in firelight. Islands of stone drifted like leaves in a currentless sea, and on each one stood a figure cloaked in ash. They turned toward her and smiled. Corwin was among them. He had not aged, had not changed. But his eyes, once clever, once full of life, were empty now. Mirrors reflecting nothing. You've come far, Myra Thornhollow, he said, his voice echoing like bells down a well. You broke the pact. I rewrote it, he corrected. I was not meant to burn. I was meant to become. Become what? The first lantern. And then he raised his hand. Dozens, no, hundreds of lanterns flared behind him. Each contained a soul. Each flickered with desperation. Each was screaming. You see it now, Corwin said. The flame is not a guide. It is a gate. And I am its keeper. Myra took a step back. This was more than she had feared. This was an invasion. And she was standing in its doorway. But she would not flee. Not now. She raised her lantern high. Its green-gold fire surged in response, lashing out like a whip of light, slicing through the air between her and Corwin. He recoiled, not in pain, but in amusement. So the air remembers how to burn, he said. I remember what you forgot, Myra answered. The flame does not belong to you. A pause. And then a grin. Then come find me, Myra Thornhollow. Come prove it. And with that, the lanterns vanished. The islands crumbled. And Myra fell into flame. Act 4, The Lantern War. Myra Thornhollow awoke in the ashes of a broken sky. Above her, stars bled through long cracks in the firmament, rivers of light slowly leaking from another realm. She lay on a floating shard of obsidian, one of thousands adrift in the sea of forgotten fire. Around her, lanterns hovered silently, their flames dim, their souls asleep. But she was awake. And she remembered. Corwin Ashvale, once a man, now something far worse, had claimed dominion over this fractured space. He had become the first lantern, master of trapped souls, and heir to a power that had once been only whispered by the oldest of the Hollow Path's keepers. Myra stood, the green-gold flame of her lantern still clutched tight in her hand. It pulsed once, then again, sinking with her breath. The fire was still with her. Still loyal. A whisper reached her ear, not a voice, but a memory. When the light turns against the flame, only the Hollowborn can choose which burns. The words were not her own. She turned. A figure approached across the void, gliding, not walking, feet never touching the stone. A woman dressed in robes stitched from strands of shadow and wind, her face hidden behind a mask carved from hollow bone. I am Virida, keeper of the second lantern, the figure said. Second? Myra asked. Virida nodded. There were once 9. Each bound to a lantern made not by hand, but by will. Corwin shattered the first and rebuilt it in his own image. The others, faded, or fell. And now, the Lantern War begins again. Before Myra could respond, Virida raised her hand. The world bent. Suddenly, Myra stood on a battlefield of flame and memory. Spirits in armor carved with runes clashed with shadows in chains. Above them, lanterns roared, not quietly flickering, but shrieking, alive with wrath. Fire twisted through the air in tendrils, binding, searing, consuming. The Lantern War, Virida whispered. A rebellion once fought within the realms of light. It ended in fire. In silence. In forgetting. Myra staggered backward. This is the past. This is the future, Myra Thornhollow. Unless you learn how to burn back. The scene dissolved. She was once again in the void. But now, there were others. 9 figures stood on floating platforms, each cloaked in a different shade: emerald, violet, sapphire, crimson, obsidian, lanterns of many hues hovering before them. Who are they? Myra asked. The last lantern bearers, Virya said. You must awaken them. Why me? Because the hollow chose you. Because your flame is not borrowed. It is forged. Myra stared at the bearers. They stood frozen, as if trapped in a slumber deeper than time. She knew instinctively each had once fought in the original war. Each had fallen, not from defeat, but from betrayal. How do I wake them? She asked. Virya handed her a small blade. Its hilt was bone. Its blade, fire. This is the ember knife. It does not cut flesh. It cuts memory. Find what binds them, the pain they buried, and set it free. Only then will they rise. Myra hesitated, then approached the nearest bearer. The figure wore green armor etched with vines. His lantern flickered with blue fire. His name came to her as if whispered by the stone beneath her feet. Kale of the verdant flame. She raised the ember knife and pressed it to the chains that bound his lantern. Visions exploded in her mind. A forest consumed by fire. Children weeping beneath burning trees. Kale, bound to a stake, accused of stealing death from the gods. He had saved too many lives. The balance had punished him for defying it. Myra screamed not from pain, but from the raw flood of sorrow. She saw Kale's hands, stained with ash, reaching out as flames devoured his grove. With a final cry, she sliced the memory free. The chains shattered. Kale gasped and dropped to his knees. Who? He murmured. I'm Myra, she said. And we don't have much time. One by one, she moved to the others. Aaron of the hollow flame, whose lover had betrayed the lantern oath to spare her soul. Sova the whisper light, who had fallen while protecting a village that no longer remembered her. Thorn of the bleeding flame, who had torn his own lantern apart to save a dying child. Each story carved her deeper. Each awakening took more strength. But one by one, they stood. By the end, 8 bearers circled her. Only one remained. The 9th. Hidden. Silent. Unseen. Where is the last? Myra asked. Virya did not answer. Her mask cracked slightly, a line of golden light shining through. And Myra understood. You're the 9th. Virya lowered her hood. Her face was scorched, one eye a swirling ember, the other a pit of shadow. I broke my lantern, she said. To seal the first. But now it burns again. Myra stepped forward. Then it's time to forge a new one. Together, they placed their lanterns in a ring. Their flames mingled red, blue, green, gold until a column of light erupted into the void. From within it rose something new. Not a lantern. A gate. It pulsed with flame. With memory. With wrath. Corwin will come, Cale said, his voice steel again. He will bring his reap, the ones bound to his wool. Let him, Myra replied. She raised the ember knife. This time, we're ready. And somewhere, far away, in the heart of a dying world, Corwin Ashvale opened his eyes. And smiled. Act 5, The Gate of Embers. The gate rose higher with each heartbeat, a spire of fire and forgotten voices erupting from the void. Around it, the air shimmered like sun over desert stone, warping reality itself. Myra Thornhollow stood at its base, her lantern in one hand, the ember knife in the other, her breath steady despite the heat of memory curling around her like smoke. The other bearers stood with her, 8 remnants of a war the world no longer remembered. Each had lit their flame anew, and each flame now fed the gate, which pulsed like a living wound between realms. But something stirred beyond the veil. Something angry. Cale of the verdant flame stepped forward, his green armor crackling with vine-like sigils. He's coming. I feel him too, Sova whispered. Her voice was soft, but her lantern burned fierce and violet. The reap walk again. Before Myra could speak, the void ahead split open. They did not march. They crawled. From the darkness beyond the gate emerged a wave of twisted souls, men and women whose lanterns had been corrupted, inverted. Instead of light, they carried smoke. Instead of warmth, they radiated cold. Their eyes were hollow. Their mouths sewn shut. They were the reaped. First came dozens. Then hundreds. They moved as one, like a tide of death, weapons forged of bone and fire clutched in malformed hands. And at their center, riding atop a chariot woven of screaming roots, was a figure cloaked in robes of ember and ash. Corwin Ashvale. He had changed. No longer the man Myra had seen in the flame realm, Corwin now radiated power ancient and unnatural. His lantern, no longer golden, burned with black fire that devoured even sound. When he spoke, the void shuddered. Children of flame, he called, why do you resist what has already been written? Myra stepped forward. Because the story you wrote burns the wrong ones. Corwin laughed, a sound like glass breaking in a furnace. You dare claim justice in a world built from forgetfulness. You wield stolen fire, Thornhollow. I am the flame's rightful heir. You betrayed the oath, Cale growled. I redefined it, Corwin said, eyes glowing. And now, I offer you one chance, kneel, and your lanterns shall remain whole. Resist, and I will turn them inside out. No one moved. Corwin sighed. So be it. He raised his lantern, and the reap charged. The gate of embers screamed a sound that vibrated through marrow, and Myra lifted her lantern high. Defend the flame, she cried. The bearers surged forward, a wall of burning memory and righteous fury. Myra darted between floating shards, her blade slicing through shadowy limbs, each strike releasing screams that echoed across the void. Kale summoned thorned vines of fire, impaling rows of reaped as Sova conjured shields of forgotten laughter, wrapping her allies in spectral joy. Thorn ever the fiercest hurled bolts of molten sorrow, each impact exploding in waves of regret that burned the enemy from the inside. Myra faced her first reap directly. Its face was half human, half hollow, as though its soul had been torn in two. It lunged, claws aimed for her throat. She ducked, spun, and drove the ember knife into its chest. Not a scream. Not a flash. But a memory. A girl, no older than 6, crying by a river. A lantern in her hands. A promise whispered, "I'll light the way home." The reap dissolved into ash. They're not monsters, Myra realized aloud. They're trapped. But Corwin didn't care. He waded into the battle himself, scattering bearers like leaves in a storm. He moved like fire incarnate, beautiful, merciless, unrelenting. When he struck, lanterns shattered. When he roared, memories unraveled. Myra met him near the center of the gate. Still trying to be the flame, he sneered. "I'm not the flame," she said. "I'm the keeper." She threw her lantern at him. It exploded not in fire, but in light. Green and gold poured from it, forming symbols that wrapped around Corwin's limbs, binding him in chains of story and truth. He snarled. "You think this binds me?" "No," Myra whispered, stepping close, ember knife in hand. "But this will." She slashed the blade across the air, not at Corwin, but behind him, slicing open the veil of memory. A rift appeared, and from it stepped Virida, her broken lantern glowing once more. "You taught me how to burn back," Myra said. Virida raised both hands, summoning the lantern oath in its original tongue. "From flame we come, to flame we tend. Not to conquer, but to mend." The gate of embers pulsed. It was listening. Corwin screamed and unleashed a shockwave of void fire, knocking Myra to the ground. Bearers fell, groaning. The reap surged again, clawing toward the gate. Myra reached for her lantern, broken. Then she reached inward and ignited. Her soul flared. A column of raw memory, laughter, sorrow, grief, joy, every moment of her life erupted from her chest. It formed a new lantern, forged not from glass or vine, but from truth. She stood. Fire in her veins. Light in her heart. "Lantern bearers," she cried, "form the circle." One by one, they obeyed. 8 lights. 1 flame. The circle of 9, restored. Myra lifted her new lantern. Burn through him. Together, they unleashed the rite of severance, a blaze of harmonized memory that struck Corwin with such force the chariot beneath him collapsed, his lantern cracking down the center. He fell to his knees. And for a moment, the reap froze. Whispers filled the void. Not screams. Names. Families. Places. The reaped were remembering. Corwin looked up, hate in his eyes but fear now too. "You can't kill me," he hissed. "No," Myra said, "but we can rewrite you." With the ember knife, she carved a symbol onto his broken lantern, the sigil of return. And with that, Corwin was pulled into the gate. Not destroyed. Reforged. The gate closed. The bearers stood in silence. The battle was over. But the war was only beginning. Act 6, The Forgotten Light. The gate of embers had sealed, but the void did not fall quiet. For days, or perhaps hours, time had begun to fracture. The lantern bearers floated among the debris of the battle, their lanterns dim but steady. Around them, the space between realms still pulsed, cracked, and stitched together with threads of flame. Myra stood at the edge of nothingness, staring into the place where Corwin Ashvale had been rewritten. Not destroyed, reformed, forced into the flow of memory. What would become of him, none could say. And yet, her soul refused to rest. There was still something missing. A flicker in the corners of thought. A name she couldn't remember, or perhaps had never known. Sova was the first to speak. "Do you feel it?" Myra nodded. A presence. Beneath it all. Kale placed a hand on the blackened shard that had once anchored the gate. Something ancient. And buried. Viria's lantern flared softly. "It's calling." "Who?" She hesitated. "The first light." The other bearers froze. Not even Thorn, the most defiant of them, dared speak. Myra blinked. "I thought Corwin was the first." "No," Viria whispered. "He was the first usurper. The first light came before the lantern pact. Before the oaths. Before us. It was a flame gifted by the voice beyond, meant to guide the dead across the hollow sea. And now, it's missing." Myra stared into her lantern, where her own soul flickered, not as a prisoner, but a guardian. "If we sealed Corwin, why is the balance still fraying?" Viria turned to her, her mask heavy. "Because someone stole the source." Myra's blood turned cold. "You mean the flame we carry is not whole?" Kale stepped forward, brow furrowed. "Then we must find the rest." "How?" Sova asked. The flame realms are broken. The hollow path has collapsed in on itself. Even the memory roots are turning to ash. Myra looked down at her ember knife, no longer just a blade. It pulsed with strands of story, branching like veins across her wrist. We don't find it, she said softly. We remember it. She walked to the center of the ruined battlefield. There, where the 9 had stood in unison, where light had become law, she drew the ember knife through the air, carving not into space, but into time. A rift opened, but not like the others. This one was soft, gentle, golden. And from it came a breeze scented with honeyed ash and old stories. The Rift of Origins. One by one, the bearers followed Myra through it. They emerged not into a place but a memory. It was not theirs. It was the world's. They stood in a forest that hummed with life older than language. Trees the size of cathedrals loomed overhead. Rivers glowed with starlight. And at the heart of the glade stood a woman. Tall. Alabaster skin kissed by shadow. Hair like flowing coal. Eyes no, lanterns of molten gold. She did not speak. But they all knew. She was the first light. Her name, Myra realized, had never been spoken, only felt. A soundless echo that lived in the memory of every flame ever lit in grief, in hope, or in love. The first light smiled and raised a hand. Images poured into Myra's mind. The creation of the lanterns born not as prisons, but as bridges. Crafted from empathy. Lit by sacrifice. Each one a bond between the living and the lost. But then, a crack. A betrayal. A name, Varnix. A shadow. Not Corwin. Older. Darker. Varnix had stolen a spark of the first flame and twisted it into a mirror. A mockery. It had whispered to mortals, promised immortality, planted the seeds of fear. Corwin had merely followed Varnix's echo, a puppet with grand ambition. Myra reeled. We sealed the wrong enemy. The first light nodded. And then she withered. Before their eyes, her form crumbled, lantern eyes dimming into dust. Kale reached out. No. But it was too late. The memory collapsed. They were thrown back into the void. Each bearer landed alone, on separate shards of memory. Myra coughed, rising shakily. Her lantern flickering. Her blade humming louder than ever. A voice whispered in the darkness. Now you see. A new figure emerged. Cloaked in ink. Eyes like dead stars. Varnix. He smiled. The first light is gone. But you carry her flame, little thorn hollow. Let's see how long it lasts. Myra raised her blade. The others were too far. Too scattered. She was alone. And Varnix stepped forward. The war you won was mine to let you win. Now, we play for what truly matters. He reached toward her chest, not physically, but through memory. Trying to rewrite her. Myra screamed, and the ember knife flared. Not with her flame. With theirs. From across the void, one by one, the bearers reappeared. Sova, Kale, Thorn, Virida, all burned back into being by her scream. Myra's soul surged. You don't own this fire. Varnix's grin vanished. Together, the bearers raised their lanterns. Light answered. Not fire. Hope. And the void flinched. For the first time, Varnix took a step back. Myra stood, defiant, lantern blazing like a newborn sun. This isn't your flame, she said. It never was. Act 7, The Pact Rewritten. The void no longer slept. Ever since Varnix emerged, the true thief of the first flame, the fabric of memory across all realms of light, had begun to fray. Lanterns, even the oldest, flickered uncertainly. Some went dark. Others wept. And across the hollow sea, souls stirred in confusion, as if their guiding light had forgotten their names. But Myra Thornhollow had not forgotten. Not her name. Not her oath. And certainly not her fire. After confronting Varnix and nearly being overwritten by his corruption, Myra had returned to the hollow citadel, a fortress floating in the crossroads of memory, where the 9 lantern bearers once pledged their oaths in fire and silence. Now, that silence was broken. And she intended to break the oath, too. Not in betrayal. In rebirth. The other bearers gathered in the central chamber, each seated at one point of the flame circle, a glowing sigil carved into obsidian and rooted in memory. The chamber pulsed with residual light, still echoing from the last time the flame pact had been spoken aloud. I propose we rewrite it, Myra said. The others said nothing, not yet. So she continued. We know now that the original pact was built on a lie. That our lanterns, meant to guide, were turned into cages. That the source of our light was stolen, severed, corrupted. She looked to Kale. You once said your lantern punished you for saving too many. Then to Sova. You were forgotten even by the souls you protected. And finally to Virida. You shattered your lantern to stop Corwin. But even you didn't know Varnix existed. Virida nodded slowly. We cannot win with broken fire, Myra said. We must forge a new flame. Not to bind souls, but to connect them. Not to trap memory, but to share it. She stepped into the center of the flame circle. and drew the ember knife. I will cut the old pact from time itself. Gasps echoed through the chamber. You'll unmake the oath, Thorn said. Our powers, our connection, will change, Myra replied. Not end. Kale rose. I stand with her. Sova followed. Me too. One by one, the bearers stepped forward, until only Virida remained. She stared at the knife, her one ember eye flickering. If this fails, she said softly, all light may go out. Myra nodded. Then let's make sure it doesn't. Virida stepped into the circle. And so the rite began. The ember knife glowed white-hot in Myra's hand as she etched new words into the circle, not on stone, but in memory. Each line, each phrase, written in fire that flowed from their lanterns into the air. Let no soul walk alone. Let no flame burn in silence. Memory is not weight, it is bridge. We carry, not command. We recall, not restrain. From the first light, we do not own, we remember. The moment the final word was etched, the ember knife cracked. A beam of light erupted from the center of the circle, piercing the void above. And something answered. From the far edge of time came a ripple, a resonance. The hollow sea stilled. The winds of the lantern realms paused. Even the corrupted souls under Varnix's sway momentarily stopped their slow march. The pact had changed. And so had the flame. Myra looked at her lantern. It no longer burned green gold. It burned all colors. Swirling bands of memory light, shifting with each breath, a living reflection of every soul it had ever touched. The other bearers' lanterns followed suit. Their flames became stories, not just sources. They sang when someone laughed, shimmered when someone forgave, wept when someone remembered. Varnix felt it. He screamed into the fractures of memory, his own stolen flame shuddering. And from the cracks in his twisted lantern, voices spilled. Not screams. Names. The souls he had stolen were remembering. Their memories no longer feared the fire. They became it. Myra heard them. Children lost in battle. Lovers waiting at doorsteps. Fathers who died with songs on their tongues. And above them all, one voice stronger than the rest. The first light. No longer just a memory. Not yet reborn. But watching. Myra stepped from the circle, the ember knife now dissolved, replaced by a flame etched into her very hand, a sigil that pulsed in time with the new pact. She turned to the bearers. We're not lantern keepers anymore, she said. We are flame weavers now. And the first ripple of hope in 1,000 years spread across the hollow sea. Act 8, The Shattering Veil. The sky cracked. Not the sky of any one world, but the sky beneath all worlds, the veil, the ancient shroud that had, for time uncounted, separated the living from the remembered. And Varnix had torn it wide open. Across every flame realm, the result was the same. Lanterns flickered and shattered mid-air. Bridges of memory turned to ash. The hollow sea, once calm and endless, surged into a storm of howling whispers and rotted light. The dead no longer waited for passage. They wandered. Unanchored. Unheard. Unseen. The lands of the living pulsed with spectral echoes, children speaking in forgotten tongues, trees bending toward invisible weepers, and cities sleeping under skies stitched with broken memories. The veil was no longer a barrier. It was a battlefield. And at its bleeding center stood Varnix. His form had changed. No longer a man, nor a memory, but a fusion of all he had consumed. His body writhed with spectral limbs, cloaked in dripping lanterns that screamed in silence. His voice was now choir and echo, his flame devouring both shadow and light alike. He stood atop the shattered spire of Cradle of Names, a realm once used to store the original titles of every soul born beneath the flame. It now burned behind him, its name libraries collapsing into flame-laced dust. He raised his hand, and the last pieces of the veil fell. In the hollow citadel, Myra Thornhollow woke with a scream that wasn't hers. It came from her lantern. From every lantern. "They're lost," Sova whispered. "The souls are falling." "Not falling," Kale corrected grimly. "They're unraveling." Virya stood before the shattered flame circle, the glow beneath it turning darker by the second. "The veil's been ripped wide. The pact was rewritten, but the veil held the seams of all realms. And now there's nothing holding memory in place." Myra staggered. "Then we need to reweb it." Thorn growled, fists burning. "You want to mend the veil? No one has even seen its root." "Not no one," Myra whispered. She opened her lantern and called to it. To the first light. To the root memory of flame. And something answered. The light within her lantern didn't shine, it sang. A song older than grief. Older than birth. It wasn't words, it was feeling, the warmth of a mother's hand, the smell of home after rain, the echo of a promise whispered over a grave. The other lanterns joined her. 9 flames hummed in harmony. A sigil burned in the air, shifting, radiant, alive. "The path of return," Virya breathed. "The root the veil was built on. It's alive. And we can walk it," Myra said. "But where does it lead?" Sova asked. "Where all lost things go," Myra replied. "To the weeping ground." No one spoke. Because they all knew what it meant. The weeping ground was myth, a whispered curse among flamekeepers, the place where souls broken beyond recall were buried. Not laid to rest. Not remembered. Erased. It was the place where the first light had wept herself into silence. And now, they would have to go there, to rekindle the root of memory, to repair the veil not by mending, but by remembering what it was. The journey began with blood. Each flame weaver gave a drop not from the body, but from their flame. A memory willingly parted, Myra gave her childhood song, Kale, the name of his grove, Sova, the last lullaby her mother sang. With these, the path revealed itself. A spiraling descent into darkness so thick it pressed on the soul like water in lungs. They walked it anyway. And it was there, at the edge of forgetting, they saw the veil from beneath. It was not cloth, not magic. It was people. Thousands upon thousands of souls, holding hands, forming a living bridge of remembrance. But they were weeping. Not in sorrow. In loss. Because their names had been stolen. Their lanterns extinguished. They could no longer remember who they were, only that they were once loved. Myra fell to her knees. I can't fix this. Viria stood beside her. No. We can. She knelt too, placing her flame in Myra's hand. One by one, the others followed. 9 flames. 1 song. They sang it together, not in power, but in truth. And the weeping ground responded. Light flared. Souls stirred. The bridge of hands gripped tighter. Names returned like spring rain. And the veil, rewove. Not as a wall, but as a threaded river. A living, breathing flow between memory and breath. And above it all, watching from the rising light, was the first light herself. Her form no longer fading, but rising. Myra met her gaze. The first light smiled and whispered, "You rewrote the fire." Then vanished. Varnix roared from across the unraveling sky, feeling the repair begin. The light no longer obeyed him. It remembered before him. The war was not over, but the tide had turned. Act 9, The Name That Burns. Varnix was afraid. Not of defeat, but of being remembered. From his throne of ash in the hollow apex, he watched as the veil newly reforged by Myra and the flame weavers pulsed with threads of memory no longer fraying. Souls once lost now whispered again. Lanterns once silent now burned with the songs of those they carried. The light no longer obeyed him. And worse, it no longer feared him. So he did what all forgotten things do when faced with truth. He sought to erase himself. From history. From memory. From fire. At the hollow citadel, Myra felt it the moment the threads began to flicker again, not breaking, but bleaching. Whole names went missing from the flame atlas. Sigils that once glowed with purpose dimmed. And worse, one of the bearers began to fade. Sova. She stood in the reflection pool, her hands trembling. I can't remember my flame, she whispered. Her lantern, once vibrant violet, was dulling. Myra rushed forward, but Virya stopped her. This is what he's doing. He's not just attacking memory. He's rewriting existence. Can we stop it? Kale asked, eyes dark. Only one way, Myra said, voice low. We find his true name. All bearers went silent. Thorn was the one to speak. You mean the soul name? Myra nodded. Every being born of flame has won the name they carried before form, before voice. It's what anchors them to the song of memory. And once a soul name is spoken, Virya added grimly, it cannot be forgotten. It becomes etched into flame. But no one knows his, said Kale. Someone does, Myra whispered. The first light. They didn't need to ask how she knew. They could feel it. Thus began the pilgrimage of names, a journey across the newly restored veil, into its deepest echoes where the first light once dwelled. Each bearer gave part of themselves to walk this path. Kale gave his courage. Thorn gave his pride. Virya gave her guilt. And Myra gave her name. Only then did the path open, a tunnel of light and bone, where rivers of memory flowed like molten silver and figures stood on the banks, watching, whispering. At the path's end was a mirror. But it did not reflect bodies. It reflected truth. Myra stepped forward. In the mirror, she saw not herself but a child. A boy. Varnix, before the corruption. Before the pact. He had not been a monster. He had once been called Ilaris, a lantern keeper, one of the earliest. His flame had not burned with wrath, but with sorrow. He had been forgotten by his own realm, passed over, deemed unworthy of oaths. And so he sought power not for domination, but to matter. And in doing so, he lost everything. Myra stepped back. That's his name, she said. Ilaris. It's beautiful, Sova whispered. And so sad. They returned to the citadel. The lanterns trembled. Varnix had begun his final ritual, the erasure. If he succeeded, he would not die. He would never have existed. And nothing, not even light, could fight what no longer had shape. Unless they remembered him first. Myra climbed the tower of sparks, a spire woven from pure memory, where the light of every soul name was once etched. She stood atop it, facing the horizon of unraveling skies. She raised her lantern and sang, Not a battle cry. Not a hymn of resistance. But a lullaby. Ilaris, child of flame. Born of shadow, lost to name. We see you. We feel you. We remember you. The other bearers joined her. Their lanterns rose. Their voices wove together. And in the void, Varnix screamed. Not from pain, but from recognition. His stolen fire flared black gold, warping the skies, but it was too late. The name was sung, and the song of flame had heard. Across the realms, every lantern sparked. Every soul stirred. Even the hollow sea rippled with soft light. And in that moment, Varnix was etched. His name, once hidden, now burned into the flame codex. Ilaris. No longer forgotten. No longer invincible. Myra stood atop the tower, her hair glowing with ember light, and whispered, "You exist. And so you are bound." The ritual collapsed. The void stilled. And for the first time, Varnix wept. Act 10, The Lantern Beyond Death. Silence had returned to the hollow citadel. But it was not peace. The name had been sung. Ilaris, once Varnix, now lived within the flame's memory, etched forever into the Codex of Souls. His power had been broken, scattered into the wind like ash after a storm. But his presence remained. Not in darkness, but in sorrow. Myra stood at the center of the citadel's flammy heart, her lantern glowing soft and warm in her hands. It did not pulse with power or fury, but with something gentler, something older. Mercy. Across from her, the 8 other flame weavers stood in silence. They had seen what she had seen, the memories inside the mirror, the boy named Ilaris, the betrayal, the hunger to be remembered. But now, the flame whispered a final truth. Ilaris had not passed on. He was still here. Trapped. Not in the void. Not in rage. But in the space between. And that space was collapsing. The veil had healed, but it still bore scars. The passage for souls had narrowed, become brittle. If Ilaris remained, if even one soul lingered outside the path, the hollow sea could rupture again. He has to be brought in, Viridius said. Fully. But he's not whole, Myra replied. His soul was rewritten so many times, he can't pass on alone. Then someone has to carry him, Sova said softly. A long pause. Everyone knew what that meant. A bearer would have to anchor his flame. Not just guide it, but bind it to their own lantern. And in doing so, surrender their place in the flame. A bearer would vanish. No resurrection. No songs. Only memory. Myra clenched her fists. This was never the plan, Cale muttered. No, said Thorn. But neither was Mercy. Myra stepped forward. I'll do it. No, Sova said quickly. It should be me. You're still fading, Myra argued. Viria raised a hand. We draw lots. But Myra shook her head. There's another way. She opened her lantern and summoned the light within. Then, instead of binding it tighter, she split it. Half of her soul flame rose into the air, swirling in the shape of a flame bird, hovering in the space above the circle. I will share myself, Myra said. Bind him, to me, but not fully. Let him burn beside me, not within. The circle trembled. No one had ever done this. It broke the lantern law again. But they had broken it before. They were flame weavers now. Rules were roots, not walls. From the center of the flammy heart, a wind rose, not cold, not harsh, but melancholy. And then he appeared. Ilaris. Not as a god. Not as a beast. As a boy. Barefoot. Lanternless. Wearing a cloak of memories. He looked at them with eyes wide, not in power, but in pain. I didn't mean to become that, he whispered. We know, Myra said. He took a step forward. I remember everything. And it hurts. It will, she said. But I don't deserve peace. No, she agreed. You deserve forgiveness. And to carry what you've done. She extended her hand. Ilaris hesitated. Then placed his fingers in hers. The flamebird dove. It wrapped around him, sinking into his chest, not consuming, not cleansing, but joining. The chamber went silent. Then, a hum. Not song, but harmony. Myra's lantern now burned not as one, but as two. Ilaris's soul would walk beside hers forever. Never forgotten. Never erased. Bound by fire. Cale dropped to one knee. Then the others followed. Viria, last, knelt and whispered, "It is done." But Myra stood still. She felt it. A shadow at the edge of the circle. Not evil. Not vengeful. But familiar. She turned. And saw. The first light. No longer fading. Fully reborn. Her eyes, twin suns, looked down at Myra and Ilaris. And for the first time, she bowed. "You have rewritten the flame," she said. and by doing so, rebuild me. You were never gone, Myra said, tears in her eyes. Just waiting. The first light smiled. Now you must choose. Choose what? What to become? The lantern was no longer a tool. It was a door. A realm of its own. And someone had to tend it. The bearers looked to Myra. You forged the pact anew, said Sova. You carried the fire, said Kale. You remembered him, said Thorn. Myra looked at her lantern, felt Ilaris within it, and nodded. I will stay, she said. Tend the lantern. Keep the path. You'll be lost to us, Virida warned. No, Myra whispered. I'll be where every soul needs me. And with that, she stepped into the lantern. Light consumed her. Not in death. In transcendence. The hollow sea stilled. The veil pulsed once. Then calmed. The lanterns across all realms flickered with joy. The name of Myra Thornhollow was etched beside Ilaris's. And the fire was finally whole. The Flameborne Era. Act 1, The Ashen Prodigy. 73 years had passed since Myra Thornhollow stepped into the lantern beyond. But time in the flame realms was no longer linear. It sang. Her name had become a melody in every lantern's light, a whisper woven into the pact, a symbol etched on the banners of the newly risen Flameborne academies. These grand halls, built across the veil-touched lands, taught the next generation not how to wield fire but how to become one with it. Among the most revered was the Citadel of Kindled Truth, a temple city floating above the hollow sea, where the flame was not a weapon but a question asked in light. And within its high stone halls, beneath murals of Myra and the flame weavers, sat a boy who had never known silence. His name was Ashir Vel, and fire whispered to him since the day he was born. He was not like the others. Where students lit lanterns in training, Ashir's flames woke themselves. Where others struggled to shape memory into light, Ashir heard stories buried so deep even the first codex ignored them. He was the youngest to enter the Ascension Archive, and the first to touch a forbidden lantern. It had no flame, only ash. The instructors called it the Sleepless One, a relic recovered from a ruined island where veil energy pulsed like a broken heart. No one had dared ignite it. But Ashir didn't ignite it. It ignited him. When his hand brushed the cold metal surface, ash curled around his wrist like smoke with weight. His vision shattered into shards of memory not his own. He saw fire that predated language. He heard a scream without sound. He saw Myra, but older, alone, burning. Ashir collapsed, lanterns across the chamber blinking in panic. When he woke, 3 figures stood over him. Not instructors. Not scholars. Flameborne watchers. The secret guard sworn to protect the legacy flame. One wore armor made of hardened smoke. Another carried a blade that pulsed with light. The third had no face, only a mirror where her eyes should be. You touched it, the mirror-faced one said. Ashir nodded, dazed. It touched me back. Did it speak? No, Ashir whispered. But it remembered. That was enough. He was taken from the academy before nightfall. Escorted across the hollow sea on a bark woven from dreamwood and emberstone. The sea hissed beneath them, the stars above flickering like watchful eyes. They arrived at the Emberroot Vault, the deepest Flameborne sanctum, built atop the last known breach in the Vale. There, Ashir met Ilaris. Not the dark god whispered in legends, but the man. Reborn. He looked no older than Ashir, yet his eyes carried eternity. You saw her, Ilaris said. Ashir nodded. Myra. Ilaris's gaze darkened. She was reaching for something. Or someone, Ashir replied. They sat in silence. Until the lantern in the center of the vault cracked. Ash dust poured from the fracture, curling into a shape, a sigil not seen since before the first pact. One word echoed across the chamber. Ithrin. Ilaris stood. Slowly. Carefully. That name shouldn't exist. Who is it? Ashir asked. Ilaris turned to him. A flame that even the first light feared. A soul cast so deep into the veil, it became ash before death. Before memory. Ashir trembled. Then why now? Ilaris whispered, because the flame no longer forgets. And it's calling him back. Above them, the vault shuddered. And somewhere far from their sight, in a land where no lantern had burned in centuries, a figure stirred in the ash of his own tomb. His eyes opened. No flame. Only dust. And he smiled. The Flameborne era. Act 2, The Lantern of Dust. Ashirvel had not slept since the vault. It wasn't that he couldn't. He simply dared not. Every time his eyes closed, the same vision returned, a mountain of ash, 1,000 lanterns buried in silence, and a single figure walking among them with no face, only a mouth, whispering a name. Over and over. Ithrin. 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 And the worst part, Ashir was starting to whisper it back. Ilaris noticed. He had been watching the boy closely, ever since the ash lantern cracked and revealed that forbidden sigil. The others, the watchers, the keepers, the lore bearers, they wanted the relic locked away. but Ilaris had seen too much of himself in Ashir's eyes. He recognized that stare. It was the look of someone whose soul had been touched by memory too old to name. And so he brought Ashir to the Chamber of Echoes, a sanctum buried beneath the Flameborne archives, where no one but the once redeemed were allowed to tread. It was here that Myra's final lantern still glowed, not bright, but steady, like a heartbeat in slumber. "She kept a secret," Ilaris said as they entered. "One not even I understood until the day she vanished." Ashir stepped forward. The lantern flared not with heat, but with dust. From within it, a voice whispered, "Do not wake him." Ashir froze. Was that her? Ilaris nodded. The last fragment of Myra's memory, sealed in flame. She left it here, in case he stirred again. Ashir looked down. "Then why am I here?" "Because he already has." At those words, the walls trembled. Above them, across the Flameborne realms, a ripple passed through the air, faint, but wrong. It wasn't Veil Breach. It wasn't Soul Drift. It was something older. A reversal. Ashir gasped. His chest burned. Ilaris caught him before he collapsed. "What is it?" he asked urgently. Ashir's eyes rolled back. He whispered, "The dust remembers what the flame forgets." And then he blacked out. When he awoke, he was no longer in the chamber. He was somewhere else. Not dream. Not death. A plain of whispering ash. He stood alone atop an endless dune, the sky above like crumpled parchment lit from beneath. And in front of him, rising like a cathedral carved from bone and silence, was a tower. The lantern of dust. It had no flame. No glow. Only echoes. Ashir stepped inside. The halls were made of cracked lanterns, walls of brittle memory. Each step brought him closer to the core, where a throne of ash stood. And seated upon it was a man. If he could be called that. Tall, skeletal, robed in layers of threadbare memory, his face hidden beneath a mask made from the fragments of broken lanterns. When he spoke, the walls wept dust. "I have waited a long time, little flame." Ashir swallowed. "You're Ithrin." "I was." He rose. And the entire tower groaned. "Now, I am ashbound." "What do you want?" Ashir asked. Ithrin tilted his head. "You carry the flame, yes. But you also carry something new." He reached out a hand. Ashir stepped back. "You carry me." Ashir's chest ached. The mark from the cracked ash lantern had spread a spiral now etched along his ribs, glowing faintly in silver and soot. "No," Ashir whispered. "You're trying to possess me." "Not possess," Ithran said calmly. "Join. I am what comes when memory is too heavy to burn. When sorrow outlives story. I am the lantern that burns after death forgets." Ashir clenched his fists. "I won't let you in." Ithran chuckled. "I am already in, boy." And with that, the tower collapsed. Ashir screamed and woke up back in the citadel, covered in ash. Ilaris knelt beside him, pale. "It's begun," he said grimly. "What has?" "The era of dust." Far away, in the forgotten fringes of the veil, ancient vaults cracked open. From within them, ash-bound rose spirits not guided by flame, but anchored by grief so powerful it petrified memory into ash. The Flameborne bells rang across the sea. The lantern keepers lit the crimson fires. And a single decree echoed across the 9 academies. "Prepare the pyre lines. The dust is walking." The Flameborne era. Act 3, The Echo Split. Ashir Vel bled memory. Not blood. Memory. Every breath he took released another whisper that did not belong to him. Moments of children lost in lanternless storms, mothers calling through dust-thick fields, flame weavers screaming as their light turned to ash mid-chant. He could not hold them all. And they were inside him. "Ithran didn't just touch your soul," Ilaris said grimly. "He rooted into it." Ashir sat in the Emberwell chamber, surrounded by shimmering sigils designed to stabilize soul fire. They weren't working. His light pulsed out of sync, as if caught between two rhythms, one alive, one decaying. "What do we do?" Ashir whispered. Ilaris closed his eyes. "There's only one thing that can burn a memory out of a soul." Ashir looked up, eyes wide. "No." "Yes," Ilaris said. "The memory flame." It had been hidden since Myra's time, locked deep beneath the lantern vaults, guarded by a triple oath and a pact writ in sorrow. It wasn't forbidden because of danger alone. It was forbidden because it remembered too well. The memory flame didn't just burn away corruption. It played everything back. Every moment. Every scar. Every failure. Myra herself had warned in her final codex page, "Beware the fire that remembers more than you can forgive." And now, they would have to light it. But not alone. The flame had a ritual. One flame weaver to carry the torch. One to split the echo. Ilaris would hold the torch. Ashir would face the echo. The chamber where it resided was known as the Vault of Unwritten Flame, a dome of obsidian cracked by time, where memories too wild or fractured to record were left to hum themselves into silence. At its center sat the memory flame, contained in a lantern the size of a coffin. It pulsed faintly, but when Ashir stepped in, it roared. The flame leapt high, turning shades of bone white and dusk purple, calling to the fragments of Ithran still buried in Ashir's chest. Ashir fell to one knee. Ilaris knelt beside him, setting down the torch, its head soaked in soul oil, its shaft carved with Myra's words. "You're not just casting him out," Ilaris said. "You're dividing yourself." Ashir nodded. He was ready. The ritual began. Ilaris lit the torch. It flared not hot, not cold, but exact. It pulsed with the rhythm of forgotten lullabies and final goodbyes. Ashir closed his eyes. The light touched his chest, and the split began. He screamed not from pain, but from remembrance. Suddenly, he was watching his own life from outside. His birth, the lantern in the room shattering as he cried. His first flame lighting by itself when he touched a forgotten name on a scroll. The day he arrived at the citadel, the wind whispering he's here. And then, a vision not his. Ithran, weeping before a sea of ashes, holding a child who would never return. He had not been a villain. He had been left behind. Ashir opened his eyes. The flame had entered him now, surrounding his memories, separating his from Ithran's, slowly, gently, like a scalpel made of light. And yet, one image refused to move. It was Myra, standing over a flame no one else could see, speaking to it, whispering. Ilaris won't understand, but if the Ashbound ever rise, I'll need someone who remembers love. The flame shimmered. Ashir's knees buckled. Ilaris caught him. "What did you see?" Ashir looked up, tears in his eyes. Myra knew. She prepared for this. She chose me. The flame around them dimmed. The ritual was ending. Ashir's soul pulsed clean, but changed. He was no longer one. He had been split. Ashir Vel, and Ashir of dust. Two echoes. One vessel. And he would have to learn to carry both. Ilaris turned to the memory flame. But it was already fading. The ritual had drained it. Perhaps forever. But before it vanished entirely, a single ember floated into the air. And in it, they both heard a voice. Myra's. Not every echo must be silenced. Some must be heard, to heal. They left the vault in silence. Outside, the hollow sea raged with new storms. A city in the east Pirathal had fallen to a veil burst. An entire Flameborne outpost had gone dark. The Ashbound were not just wandering. They were building a new pyre front. Ashir looked down at his hand. The spiral mark was gone, replaced with a small, silver sigil that looked like both fire and wind. He had survived the echo split. But now he was something new. The Flameborne era. Act 4, The Dust Choir. Ashirvel had become a bridge. A bridge between the living and the forgotten. The ash lantern mark on his chest was no longer a scar. It was a story. A tether between his own soul and the ancient echoes of Ithrin, a man who had once been a keeper of flame, now nothing more than a shadow in the dust of time. The citadel of kindled truth, once a beacon of flame, now trembled beneath the weight of what Ashir had become. And as his footsteps echoed through the sacred halls, the walls themselves seemed to lean in, as if they too were listening. The other Flameborne watched him from afar. They could feel the difference. The air hummed differently around Ashir. It was charged, not with the usual spark of pure fire, but with the resonating tremor of 1,000 forgotten names, each one barely tethered to its original bearer. And they were calling. It was late when Ashir finally found Ilaris in the library, studying ancient codices of flame history. The elder Flameborne's face was lit by the soft glow of the memory flame he had kept hidden, the flame Myra had left behind. "You're still listening to it?" Ashir asked, stepping into the room. Ilaris glanced up, his expression unreadable. "It's not that I listen to it. It listens to me." "Are we doing the right thing?" Ashir asked, his voice low, tinged with the weight of doubt. Ilaris sighed, the flicker of flame casting long shadows across the library. "The right thing? There is no right when it comes to memory. Only survival." "Survival of what?" Ashir pressed. "Of flame. Of fire. Or of what we were before all this. You've seen what happened to the veil. I can still feel it pulling me." Ilaris lowered his gaze to the codex before him, then closed it slowly. "You haven't seen what's coming. The Ashbound are gathering. They know we're here." Ashir felt the pull in his chest, as if the very ashes of the world were calling to him. The mark on his skin seemed to pulse in time with his heartbeat, reminding him that his soul was not fully his own anymore. Part of him, part of Ithrin, was alive in the world again. "I'm not them," Ashir said firmly. "You don't get to decide that," Ilaris replied softly. "The Dust Choir doesn't ask for permission." At those words, a chill passed through Ashir's spine. The Dust Choir, a term whispered among the Flameborne, one so dangerous that few dared to speak of it. It was not just a collection of ashbound souls. It was a horde, a collective of forgotten names that could shape the veil itself. And worse, it was drawn to Ashir's unique flame. Ilaris rose, moving toward the large chamber window, his expression distant. "There's an ancient tale in the codex, Ashir. A tale about how the flame came to be. how it was split from the first ember. Ashir's brows furrowed. What are you saying? I'm saying, the dust choir was never meant to be. It was an echo of something older, something that didn't fade when the first flame split from the veil. They were remnants of a time before the pact was ever written. Before the first light. Before Myra. Ashir asked, his voice tightening. Before any of us, Ilaris said. Ashir stood silent, the weight of those words settling over him like a shroud. The dust choir wasn't just a threat. It was a reminder of something more ancient, more primal, than even the Flameborne could understand. What do we do? Ashir asked. We go to them, Ilaris said, turning back to face him. We face the dust choir head on. The night they departed was cold. Ashir stood at the edge of the citadel, looking out over the flame-drenched horizon. The great cities of the Flameborne Academy had fallen silent in the distance. Far beneath him, the hollow sea raged, restless as the sky, casting ripples of light in all directions. Beside him stood Ilaris, Thorn, Kale, and Sova. The Flameborne were few, but their fire was unyielding. We'll need to move fast, Thorn said, her eyes scanning the horizon. If they're coming. They're already here, Ilaris said, his voice cold. The choir has no need for time. It bends space with every note they sing. And then Ashir felt it. The song. It was faint at first, a low hum that started from the depths of the hollow sea. The sound felt like sand against his skin, a soft scraping, an endless call from the veil's edge. The ashbound were gathering. The dust choir was rising. Follow me, Ilaris said, his voice steely. We fight in the ruins of the forgotten. The journey took them to the edge of the hollow sea, to the ruins of the forgotten, an ancient city built at the very intersection of realms, where the veil had once been weakest. It was here that the first flame had burned brightest and where the first flame had split into darkness. The ruins were crumbling, caught between time and oblivion, their broken spires reaching into a sky that was neither day nor night. And standing at the heart of it all was the dust choir. They weren't just souls. They were memories made flesh. Each of them had once been a name. A person. A life that had mattered. And now they were only ashes walking, breathing dust. They stood in a circle, their faces covered by hoods of shattered light. At the center of their gathering was a single lantern, cracked, empty, but still alive. The sound they made was not a song, but a scream that could be felt in the bones of the earth, in the soul of every living being. Ashir stepped forward, his lantern flickering in his hands. And then, they spoke. Ashir Vel. The name echoed in his mind. Ashir Vel, they repeated. You are the song. The Flameborne Era. Act 5, The Flames of Remembrance. The wind howled across the ruins of the forgotten, but it wasn't the wind that made Ashir shiver. It was the silence. The dust choir stood before them not as enemies at first, but as echoes. Faint whispers of memory that turned the very air heavy. Each face they wore had been a person once. A name lost to time, a soul whose flame had been erased. And yet now, here they were. Ashir's lantern flickered beside him, the mark on his chest the sigil of Ithran's soul still pulsing in time with the gathering of ashbound souls. They weren't just waiting. They were calling. Ashir swallowed. Why are they here? His voice was quiet, almost afraid. They seek to remind us, Ilara said from behind him, stepping forward with the other Flameborne by his side. The dust choir doesn't fight for power. They fight for the past. To return what's been forgotten. To tear down the walls that separate the living from the dead. Ashir's gaze flickered between the ashbound souls. And what if we give it to them? Ilaris turned. We've been given a gift, Ashir. A gift of memory. The first flame wasn't meant to be forgotten. It was meant to be remembered by every living being that ever carried it. Ashir's lantern flared brighter. But Ithran, he wasn't meant to lose himself. Neither was Myra. Nor any of us, Ilaris interrupted, his voice fierce. They tried to burn too bright, too quickly. They crossed the veil. And now we're all paying for it. The ground beneath them rumbled. The dust choir raised their heads. And Ashir felt it then. The same weight of remembrance that had torn through him when he first touched Ithran's lantern. The weight of every soul that had ever been forgotten. It wasn't a curse. It was a call. From behind the ashbound, the flickering figure of the lantern's original flame, the memory flame, began to appear. It wasn't whole, not yet, but Ashir could see it forming a figure of light standing among the gathered ashes, but with no face. It was watching him. And Ashir felt himself step forward, drawn to it, unable to resist. Ashir Vel. The voice came from everywhere. In the wind. In the flames. In his mind. The choir whispered his name. But there was something wrong. The voice wasn't just calling for him. It was calling from within him. Ashir reached up to his chest, his hand trembling. And there, beneath the lantern's light, he saw it. The shadow. A silhouette of something once alive. A man or a boy. And the mark upon him was the same as his own, but older. Ashir Vel, the figure said again, this time in a voice that was his own but not his own. You are the flame I never was. The lantern I could not hold. The vision shifted. It became clearer. Ashir stumbled backward. Ithran, he whispered. The shadow of the boy before him laughed. Not yet, Ashir. Not yet. And then it split. The shadow fractured like glass, scattering into pieces of dust, pieces that fell into the wind and vanished. Ashir looked around. The dust around him shifted. It became alive. And the choir sang. But the song wasn't a war cry. It wasn't a call for battle. It was a call for remembrance. Ashir turned to face Ilaris. I know what they want now. Ilaris nodded. They want the flame to remember. They want the past to return. But why? Why now? Ilaris closed his eyes. Because the flame doesn't forget. The flame is memory. And once it remembers, it never stops burning. Ashir looked at the lantern in his hands. He could feel the pull, the weight of the dust, the ashes. They were becoming him. Suddenly, the ashbound spoke again. No more forgetting, they murmured in unison. And Ashir's chest burned. He could feel it now. The flame of the past was growing stronger. The ash around him began to swirl. Not again, Ashir whispered, trying to fight the pull. Not this time. But the dust was inside him. The memories were inside him. His soul, divided and bound by flame, was no longer his alone. He could hear the choir's song, resonating through every fiber of his being. And in the distance, standing above the ashbound, was the figure again, the memory flame. It called to him. And Ashir knew. The flame was not just his burden to bear. It was his fate. The dust choir was not just a gathering of lost souls. They were a reminder. A warning. A rebirth. Ashir's lantern flared one last time, and the memory flame shot into the air like a comet, lighting the entire sky. The echoes of forgotten souls, the ashbound, they sang with it. Ashir's chest burned, his soul splitting again. But this time, it wasn't into two. It was whole. And he was the flame. And he would remember. The Flameborne era. Act 6, The Last Echo. The world was burning, and Ashirvel was the flame. He had not asked for this. He had not asked to be the vessel that carried both the light of 1,000 souls and the ashes of 1,000 forgotten names. But now, the fire in his chest was no longer just his burden. It was his purpose. The wind howled across the shattered landscape of the ruins of the forgotten, where the last remnants of the dust choir lingered. Their song had grown fainter, but still, it lingered in the air like smoke that could never fully escape. Ashir stood at the edge of the great fissure where the choir had risen, his lantern burning brighter than ever before. The ashes around him swirled like the echoes of a storm long past, yet the air was still thick with the weight of memories that were not his own, but that now lived within him. He could feel them. The souls of the past. Their names were no longer whispers. They were him. He could feel them tugging at his soul, reminding him of the pact he had made not with the Flameborne, but with the very fire itself. The fire that had burned too brightly in Myra's hands. The fire that had consumed Ithrin, and that now sought to remember everything, to burn away the very fabric of time. "You're still here," Ashir whispered to the air, feeling the weight of the words settle deep within his chest. "Still calling to me?" From the shadows, Ilaris stepped forward, his face still etched with the weight of his past. He had watched Ashir struggle, seen the boy grow into something both greater and more fragile than any of them could have predicted. "You can't keep fighting it," Ilaris said softly, his voice a low murmur against the wind. "The flame isn't a curse. It's a path. You have to walk it." Ashir turned, his eyes still reflecting the flicker of the lantern in his hand. "Walk it? Into what? I can't become this. I can't be a torchbearer for souls I never knew." "You don't need to know them," Ilaris said, his gaze steady. "You just need to remember them. That's what the Flameborne are meant to do, to carry what's been lost, so that it doesn't burn out of existence." Ithrin was right, Ashir muttered, the bitterness rising in his chest. "We're not meant to carry anything. We're supposed to forget it all. But now, it's too late." "You think it's too late?" Ilaris asked. "You think Myra thought it was too late when she gave everything to protect this world? To protect you?" Ashir flinched. Myra's name felt like a shard of glass in his heart. "She knew," Ilaris continued. "She knew this was the price. The flame doesn't die, Ashir. It just shifts. And you are the one who will decide whether it burns out, or burns." Ashir's lantern flickered again, casting long shadows across the ruin. His chest tightened. The souls that lingered, his own and Ithrin's, felt like weight pressing against him. "I don't want to lose myself," Ashir whispered, the fear creeping into his voice. "You won't," Ilaris replied, stepping forward, his hand gently resting on Ashir's shoulder. "But you will have to let go." The words hit Ashir like a wave crashing against a rocky shore. Let go. It wasn't just the flame he had to let go of. It was everything. His past. His choices. His identity. He had to burn them all away. And that was the price. Ashir's hands trembled, the mark on his chest flaring brightly. It was no longer just a symbol. It was a flame of fire of memory that would not be smothered. And he understood now. He understood what the Flameborne were meant to carry. Not to bear the past, but to make it part of their fire. Are you ready? Ilaris asked softly. Ashir looked out across the ruins. The dust had settled. The storm had passed. And the world waited. The first flame had burned for too long. And now, it was his turn to carry it. "I'm ready," Ashir said, his voice steady. They returned to the citadel of kindled truth. The once grand halls of the Flameborne Academy were now but a shadow of their former self. The lanterns burned dim, the scholars hushed, and the air thick with the weight of history. Ashir could feel the burden on his shoulders. The flame in his chest throbbed with the memories of the past. But he could not hide from it anymore. The ritual to join the flame to burn the past away was set in motion. The memory flame, weakened but not destroyed, lay at the center of the citadel's great hall, waiting for Ashir to light it. The watchers stood in silence, their eyes watching him as he approached the flame. "No turning back," Thorn said from behind him. Ashir nodded. The memory flame rose, its light bending in the air, forming a pillar of pure, white fire. It called to him. It demanded his soul. Ashir stepped forward and held out his lantern. The first ember sparked, igniting the memory flame. It rose higher, turning the chamber into a field of blinding light. Ashir could feel it pulling at him, the weight of every soul, every memory, every name that had been lost to time. And then it happened. The flame burst forth, not with heat, but with voices. The voices of every soul ever forgotten. The voices of the dust choir. And in that moment, Ashir felt himself split. Not torn, but divided, one part still a boy, a Flameborne, carrying the flame for all to see. The other part of him burned away. "I am Ashir Vel," he whispered, the words resonating across the hall. "And I remember." The Flameborne Era. Act 7, The Phoenix Flame. Ashir stood at the edge of the ruins of the forgotten, feeling the weight of every soul that had come before him, every soul that had burned too brightly, too quickly, and every one that had been forgotten. The wind howled through the broken spires and crumbling stone, and the ashes beneath his feet whispered with the weight of time. The flame inside him flickered, but it wasn't the warm, steady burn of the past. It was the flame of rebirth. The Phoenix Flame. The first flame had burned, and it had consumed everything in its path. It had consumed Myra, it had consumed Ithrin, it had consumed the very memory of the world itself. But now, it was Ashir's turn to carry it. The decision that had been placed on him was not one he had chosen. It had been thrust upon him, just as it had been thrust upon Myra, just as it had been thrust upon every Flameborne who had come before him. The flames were not gifts. They were burdens. And now Ashir had to decide whether to carry the flame as it was meant to be carried or to burn it all away. "You've done it," Ilaris said quietly from behind him. His voice had the weight of ancient knowledge, the sound of someone who had seen too much and understood too little. "You've split the flame." Ashir's gaze remained fixed on the distant horizon, where the world's edges blurred into the void. "Is it too much to bear?" he asked. "No," Ilaris replied. "But it's never been easy." Ashir closed his eyes, feeling the pulse of the flame inside him, knowing that the choice was his alone. They had all forgotten, at some point. The Flameborne, the Flamekeepers, the first light. They had all burned too brightly and been swallowed by their own fire. But Ashir was different. He had remembered. He could feel the weight of all the forgotten names pressing against him, the ghosts of those who had been lost to time. The fire inside him wasn't just a weapon. It wasn't just a tool to burn the past away. It was a key. The phoenix flame was not meant to destroy. It was meant to transform. "I can't keep running from this," Ashir said, his voice quiet but resolute. "I am the flame. I can either burn out, or I can rise." Ilara stepped forward. "You don't have to do it alone." Ashir shook his head. "But I do. This is my path." He reached out, pulling the lantern from his belt. The flame inside it was bright, but it wasn't the steady, golden light that had once guided the Flameborne. It was something new, something raw. It was a phoenix. Ashir closed his eyes again, and he could feel it, the weight of the memories inside him, the ashes of everything that had burned before. He could feel the fire calling, reaching out to him. And then he spoke the words that would change everything. "Burn." The flame inside the lantern flickered, flaring to life with an intensity that shook the ground beneath him. It wasn't the fire of destruction. It was the fire of rebirth. The flames spread outward, and Ashir could feel them coursing through his body, searing him from the inside out. It wasn't pain. It wasn't agony. It was life. The lantern exploded with light, the phoenix flame soaring into the sky like a comet, and Ashir felt it, the past, the future, the present, all converging into a single moment. He could feel the ashes of the world lifting away. And in their place, something new was born. The light was no longer just his. It was theirs. It was everyone's. Far away, in the heart of the hollow sea, the pyre front had begun to rise. The flame was no longer just an element. It was life. And Ashir Vel, the boy who had carried the flame, had become the phoenix. The Flameborne era. Act 8, The Eternal Ember. The world had shifted. Ashir Vel could feel it, deep in his bones. The phoenix flame had ignited within him, but it was no longer just an ember in a lantern. It had become a living force, both life-giving and destructive, a power that could heal or break depending on who wielded it. And now, standing at the edge of the pyre front, the heart of the Flameborne's new world, Ashir faced the reality of what he had become. The flame he had once only carried was now part of him, coursing through his veins, lighting the way for the generations to come. But it wasn't just hope. It was fire, and fire burns. Far below him, the pyre front itself had begun to rise, a towering, glowing city built from the ashes of the old. It was meant to be the heart of the Flameborne's future, a place where the new generation could learn to wield the flame as a tool of creation, not destruction. But Ashir felt the pull. It wasn't just his own flame calling him. It was the dust choir. They had followed him, trailing behind like shadows in the light. Their song had faded, but their presence remained. They were waiting, hovering at the edges of the veil, drawn to his flame like moths to a fire. And Ashir knew that they wouldn't stop until they had what they wanted. "Are you ready?" Ilaris's voice pulled him back to the present. Ashir turned to see the elder Flameborne standing beside him. His expression was calm, but there was a flicker of concern in his eyes. "I don't know if I am," Ashir admitted. "The flame. It's not just a tool anymore. It's a force. And it's pulling me in directions I don't understand." Ilaris nodded. "It always does." Myra felt it too. But she never gave in. "You have to make sure that your flame doesn't consume you, Ashir." Ashir looked at the towering flames of the pyre front, the city that was meant to be their sanctuary. "How do I stop it from consuming me?" "By remembering why you carry it." Ashir's lantern flared brightly, its light brightening the darkened skies. "I remember," Ashir said softly, stepping toward the city. "I remember everything." The journey down to the city was slow, each step a heavy weight upon his shoulders. The streets were lined with the ruins of the old Flameborne Academy, now transformed into foundations for something new. The air was thick with the smell of smoke and burning wood, but there was also a sense of hope, a sense that the future was being forged in fire. But Ashir knew that the phoenix flame could burn as much as it could create. And as they walked deeper into the city, the first true test of his power came. A figure emerged from the shadows. The dust choir. They stood before him, their forms twisting and warping with the heat, their faces hidden beneath the masks of broken lanterns. But Ashir knew who they were, remnants of a time lost, echoes of souls who had been forgotten, erased by the flame. And they were waiting for him. "We've been waiting for you, Ashir Vel," one of them said, his voice a low, eerie hum that echoed through the streets. Ashir clenched his fists. "I told you, I'm not one of you." The dust choir laughed. "Not yet, perhaps," the figure said. "But you will be. You have the phoenix flame within you. And that flame belongs to us." "No," Ashir said, stepping forward. "It doesn't." The choir advanced, the air around them flickering with the heat of their presence. Ashir could feel his flame responding, flickering in his chest like a heartbeat. "You cannot escape what you are," the figure said, his voice growing darker. "You carry the past within you. The fire that consumed everything. And you will burn with it." Ashir's lantern flared bright, its light pushing back the shadows. He could feel the weight of the flame in his chest, the pull of the past trying to drag him down. "No," Ashir said again, his voice strong. "I choose my own flame." The dust choir hissed, their forms writhing as Ashir summoned the full force of his phoenix flame. The fire erupted from his lantern, cascading out in a wave of heat and light. And for a moment, the world stood still. The flame tore through the streets of the pyre front, burning away the remnants of the old world and illuminating the darkness. The dust choir screamed as the flames licked at their forms, their whispers dissolving into nothingness. Ashir stood in the heart of the blaze, his chest heaving as the fire settled around him. He had chosen his flame. And he had chosen to let the past burn. But even as the flame faded, Ashir knew that this was only the beginning. The dust choir had been defeated, but there would be more. There would always be more. The flame never stops. Are you all right? Ilaris asked, stepping forward. Ashir nodded, his eyes still glowing with the light of the phoenix flame. I will be, he said. But the flame. It's never done. The Flameborne Era. Act 9, The Fire That Never Dies. Ashirvel stood alone in the heart of the pyre front, where the streets once crumbled beneath the weight of forgotten names and the dust choir's endless lament. Now, the flame that he had chosen, the phoenix flame, burned brightly, casting new light over a world that had been broken, but not destroyed. The air was thick with smoke and the scent of charred ruins. But there was hope now, a fragile hope that hung in the air like a fragile ember, waiting to catch fire. Ashir could feel it in his chest, the fire that never dies. The weight of it. The pull of it. The responsibility of it. His lantern flared beside him, its light casting shadows on the stone walls, and he felt the ghosts of the past stirring within him. He had defeated the dust choir, but in doing so, he had become something else, something more. The flame inside him was no longer just a force of destruction. It was the beginning. And with that beginning came the heavy burden of memory. Are you ready? Ilaris's voice broke through the silence, pulling Ashir from his thoughts. Ashir turned to face him, his face grim but resolute. I don't know if I'm ready, he admitted. But I don't have a choice. Ilaris stepped forward, his expression unreadable. The flame is a part of you now, Ashir. You can either control it, or let it consume everything. I don't want to be consumed, Ashir said, his voice low, his lantern burning brighter with each word. But I can't let the flame burn out either. We've been given this power, Ilaris. We have to make sure it doesn't destroy what we've built. Ilaris nodded slowly, his gaze steady. The phoenix flame is a gift and a curse. It will burn for as long as we allow it, but it will only burn what we choose. Ashir's eyes hardened. And I choose to burn what remains of the past. He looked around at the pyre front, the city rising from the ashes of the old. The Flameborne Academy was still there, though barely standing. The ruins of the old world were scattered among the new, like remnants of a story that had been told and retold until the pages were torn and faded. We can rebuild, Ashir said, his voice growing stronger. but we must remember. Not everything can be forgotten. Ilaris's eyes softened. You've learned well. But remember, Ashir, you are not alone. The flame may burn in you, but it burns in all of us. Ashir turned away from Ilaris, his lantern held high. The weight of the flame pressed down on him, but he knew it was a weight he could bear. For now. The rest of the Flameborne stood behind him, their lanterns burning bright in the rising light of a new day. They had all chosen their flame. They had all chosen to remember. And now, they had to decide what to do with the fire that had once burned too bright. Ashir's chest ached, the weight of the flame threatening to overwhelm him. He knew the stories. He knew the legends. He had seen the ashes of the dust choir, the souls who had been lost to time. But now, the flame was no longer just an echo. It was a song. And he had to decide what he wanted that song to be. The Ember Front was the heart of the new world, where the Flameborne could gather, learn, and grow. But the path ahead was uncertain. The past had been rewritten, but there were still remnants, echoes of the old world, that lingered in the corners of their minds. And there was one thing that Ashir had to face: the truth of his own fire. As he stepped toward the center of the Ember Front, the ground beneath his feet seemed to hum with power. The flame that had once been a curse, a weight he could not escape, now felt like a part of him. He was no longer the boy who had stumbled into the citadel of kindled truth, uncertain of his place. He was the flame. And he had to make sure it did not burn the world to the ground. Behind him, Ilaris, Thorn, Sova, and the others followed. Their lanterns burned bright, each one a piece of the whole, each one a reflection of the choice they had all made. Ashir stood at the edge of the pyre front, looking out over the horizon. The sky was alight with the colors of a new dawn, the first light in a world that had long been shrouded in shadow. The phoenix flame burned inside him, but it was no longer a fire of destruction. It was a fire of creation. And the world would have to choose whether it would rise with him. The Flameborne Era. Act 10, The Fire of Eternity. The wind whispered through the pyre front, carrying with it the scent of burning wood and the flicker of ash. The city was alive with the light of 1,000 lanterns, each one casting long shadows against the walls of the new world Ashir had helped to create. The phoenix flame, once a force of destruction, now burned brightly as the beacon of hope. But Ashirvel was no longer certain of what hope truly meant. The weight of the flame in his chest had grown heavier with each passing day, its light growing brighter but more distant. It was not the same flame that had first ignited within him. It had changed. It had become something else. Something that threatened to consume him and everyone around him. He had chosen this path. He had chosen to remember. But now, he wondered if the flame could ever truly be controlled. "What is it, Ashir?" Ilaris asked, his voice soft but urgent. He stood at the edge of the pyre front, watching Ashir as he stared out over the horizon. "You've been silent for days." Ashir turned, his lantern flickering weakly in his hand. "I'm trying to understand," he said, his voice hollow. "Trying to understand what we've done. We've burned away the past, but what if we've burned too much?" Ilaris's gaze softened. "We're not burning the past, Ashir. We're carrying it. The flame doesn't destroy what came before, it transforms it. That's why you were chosen to hold it. But what happens when the flame burns too bright?" Ashir asked, his voice cracking. "What happens when it consumes everything in its path? What happens when it consumes me?" Ilaris approached him, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You felt the weight of the flame, Ashir." "I know. I felt it too, when I was younger. But you're stronger than you think. You have the power to guide it, to let it light the way without losing yourself." "I don't know if I can anymore," Ashir whispered. Ilaris said nothing, only watching him. They stood in silence for a long moment, the sound of the wind whispering through the pyre front, carrying with it the voices of a world reborn. But Ashir couldn't shake the feeling that something was still missing. Something was still wrong. Suddenly, a cry broke through the silence, a scream that echoed through the streets of the city. Ashir's heart skipped a beat. The dust. The ashes. The remnants of the old world. The dust choir. The voices that had once been forgotten, that had risen in search of their place in the light, were now calling again. Ashir's lantern flared to life, its flame burning brighter, but the voices of the dust choir grew louder, filling his ears, drowning out his thoughts. "No," Ashir said, his breath catching. "Not again." But it wasn't just the dust choir. It was something else. The air around him began to bend. The flame inside his chest burned hotter, and Ashir realized, with a cold dread creeping into his bones, that it wasn't just the dust choir rising. It was the phoenix flame itself. The flame was no longer a part of him. It had become the world. It was breaking free of its boundaries, stretching beyond the flame he held. Ashir staggered backward, his lantern glowing too brightly, its light almost blinding. He could feel it. The flame was becoming a force, a living, breathing entity. "Ilaris!" he cried, but his voice was drowned out by the roar of the flame. Ilaris stepped forward, his eyes wide with realization. The flame is consuming everything. It's not just burning away the past. It's burning everything. The flame swelled, rising like a great wave, crashing over the pyre front. Ashir could feel his body trembling, the weight of the fire pressing against him, urging him to let go, to surrender to its power. But he couldn't. "I can't let it take over," Ashir whispered. "I can't let it consume us all." He raised his lantern high, his hand shaking, and for a moment, everything seemed to stop. The flame burned brightly. The fire, the past, the ashes, it all merged into a single, blinding light. And then, Ashir made his choice. He stepped into the light. He let the phoenix flame engulf him. But instead of being consumed, he became part of it. The flame settled. The chaos died. Ashir stood at the heart of it all, the flame inside him, the fire that had once been a threat, now calm, steady, and alive. The phoenix flame no longer burned. It breathed. And Ashir, the boy who had carried it, the boy who had once feared its power, now understood. It was never about control. It was about remembering. And now, he could remember. The flame wasn't just his burden anymore. It was his legacy. A legacy of rebirth, of creation, of light. He felt the light of the lantern warm his soul. And in that moment, Ashir knew. The fire would never die.